Hi everyone, I'm Gillie Stoneham and I'm delighted to introduce you to the certificate course in Gender-Affirming Voice and Communication for the Voice Study Centre. I'm a cis woman, my pronouns are she, her, and I've been working in gender-affirming voice since 2006. Over the last 18 years, I've been part of the West of England Gender Clinic, more recently as a consultant setting up a much larger voice service as part of the team. And I also worked for a number of years at the Tavistock Gender Clinic in London. I now work independently and closely with Gender Identity Southwest. My aim is to come at the course from three angles: my knowledge and skills as a voice and communication therapist in healthcare, my experience and expertise in coaching voice and personal impact, and also, most importantly, my collaboration over the years with people with lived experience. So I'm going to share my screen and we'll look at each session. So I'll start with session one. And this introductory session will be an orientation, as it says, to working with gender-affirming voice. So we'll look at how we ground the work we do in cultural sensitivity and humility, in particular if we're practitioners who identify as cis. A colleague with lived experience will accompany me in exploring this area in relation to gender dysphoria and euphoria. And we'll use their expertise to consider the wider impact of othering and belonging, to look at the concept of allyship and finding ways of connecting and embracing differences, and how we work collaboratively with someone's unique vocal goals. We'll also look at how the work we do sits at the interface of voice therapy, voice teaching, and voice coaching. And that will involve looking at how do we work within our own professional boundaries, whilst we also recognise where those professions overlap and what we can share with each other in terms of our own practice. We'll look at some of the concepts such as privilege, unconscious bias, and where we all manage risk and our own vulnerability around speaking. Being in relationship with our own voices, we can better reflect on how we express our authentic selves, what is our own vocal identity, how our own vocal dynamics change, and where the challenges are. And that makes us much more effective in walking alongside someone else and co-creating activities with them that will help them have more choice around their styles, their vocal styles, their expressive styles that fit with their identity. There'll be a practical part to each session. So the practical part in this first session will review the vocal parameters of pitch, resonance, and vocal weight or mass, and also inflection, although this will be more in the following week, and how we vary those in our own expression. In the second session, we'll briefly consider what services and pathways exist to support transition in any of the processes that enable people to find gender comfort and euphoria. And this contextual understanding helps us in turn to understand where somebody's voice might be a larger or smaller part of this gender comfort. We'll explore general practices, principles of practice in gender-affirming voice and communication, for example, repetition and motor learning, play, and developing a hierarchical approach. So we'll consider building both competence and confidence around vocal skills. We can build the skills, but we also need to be confident to use things like modeling, demonstration, to modify our own voice qualities, to both share with somebody how they might better do that, and also to share the challenge and how often it's risky for all of us to do that. So there's something about offering early support whilst we're actually building skills. There are lots of tricks and tips that we can offer that somebody can start using straight away. And I think that's a really important part of working with people, that, learning to use different vocal techniques takes time. And people come with all kinds of anxieties and desires to make changes in their everyday speech as soon as possible. And so there are some little tips that we can offer that people can start using straight away, but also to get stuck in with the routine and the practice and that kind of more everyday drilling of vocal skills that helps them build competence. We'll also take a deeper dive into re-examining pitch, resonance, and vocal weight, in particular in functional voice and vocal expression. We'll look at things like objective and subjective outcome measures. Some people really like to have objective measures such as pitch, measuring pitch. For some people, that's not helpful at all. And some people are much happier looking at how comfortable they are, how good their voice feels, how happy they are with it, and not worried about some of the more scientific measures. So it's really about individual choice and how we might adapt what we use to suit the individual person. And what we're trying to do, of course, with everyone is to support positive change and support people psychologically through the challenge of behavioral change. Any kind of behavioral change can be really difficult. And there's this paradox of change where people desperately want to change, but actually if it's too difficult, there's also, for some people, that pull towards avoiding the thing that's hard. So how do we support people knowing that that's the case? How do we help people to stay motivated and to find small successes in some of the little changes that they might not notice themselves? So as participants, you'll be encouraged to build a toolkit, including that confidence to demonstrate and model, and also to share expertise so that you can think of it as scaffolding more choice in vocal expression. In session 3, we'll continue exploring that need to balance the physical with the psychological. How do we best support people's individual goals for voice and create those opportunities for success and developing sustainable, more comfortable habits that they can integrate? And if we're looking at how we can help people to integrate the work they're doing into their own social context, then voice groups are a fantastic way of bridging that integration. They extend the opportunities for exploring voice in more complex social interaction, in more everyday situations. And what we're doing in voice groups as facilitators is building that community together with participants so that over a number of voice groups, people really feel like they are the experts in their own voice and also are supporting each other in a way that we have supported them at the beginning. So we're building that self-efficacy, that work to more independence, that move towards, certainly with me, that move towards myself as a therapist not being needed anymore. And that's the kind of best that I could hope for, that somebody is off with enough tools and enough motivation and enough choices to continue their own vocal journey. In voice groups, we can help people to develop feedback, giving and receiving feedback. How do we affirm what others are trying to do with their voices? How do we recognize difference and realize that we're not all aiming for the same thing? And for some people, a small change is enough. For some people, there may be a kind of desire to go on and try and perfect aspects of voice in which might be their own words. So how do we navigate some of those assumptions and biases, some of the challenges that people will meet in the outside world? And we can look at that in voice groups, particularly by using activities that simulate some of those real life activities, such as going to the pub, public speaking, bumping into people in doctors' waiting rooms, at bus stops. And we can look at some of those everyday situations and where people might not have one voice, but have different voices for different situations, and that's fine too. We can look at things like nonverbal behavior and how that supports voice, and how voice then becomes part of the whole dynamic of communication. It doesn't exist on its own. and that's and people can be supported by realizing that as communicators, we are reading lots of different signals, and we're reading some of those peripheral signals, not just voice. And sometimes we don't notice voice, that actually we're looking at some of the other communication signals and recognizing when somebody is warm and friendly and wants to communicate with us, and where the voice perhaps isn't as important as somebody thinks it might be to the listener. We can look at increasing linguistic complexity and cognitive load when we're having to think harder about things, and also balance still keeping a little bit of focus on voice, looking at things like speaking on the telephone and assertive voice. So that practical work in that session will focus on how we use vocal expression in some of those situations, techniques to build skills and confidence in groups, and that sort of that feedback. And we'll touch on the relationship between singing voice and speaking voice. In session 4, I'll be joined again by another expert by experience who is neurodivergent. And in this session, we'll be exploring working with differences and looking at things like accessibility of information, exploration, and practice. There'll be further opportunity to consider contexts such as projection, public speaking, presentation, and particularly using improvisation as a tool for looking at vocal dynamics within those complexities of human interaction that I was just talking about. And then finally, in session 5, we'll bring it all together and review some of the topics that we've covered in the other sessions. There'll be time for looking again at what the implications are for those working with singing voice, and thinking about where you are now in your own vocal journey and what your next steps are in building an inclusive, gender-affirming practice, where you are sharing wisdom, where you're building strategies and helping individuals on their own vocal journey. So we'll share some wisdom. We'll have time for Q&A. There'll of course be questions around the portfolio, which will be introduced at the beginning of the module of the course, and how to access support for that portfolio. My hope is that this course will unite us in examining this field, because it's changing very quickly. Excuse me. And so it'll extend, hopefully, what you already know and use in your practice. My hope is that you'll dig deeper into your relationship with your own speaking voice as part of building that expertise in supporting others. Looking forward to meeting you all and welcoming you in November.